What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today I'm going to be showcasing 7 different Arishem decks that I've been messing around with since the nerf, including an update to what I've dubbed as the new Arishem, which I showcased in a recent video, and I'm also doing a giveaway. You can comment on any of my videos this season to be entered in for a chance to win 2 mystery variants, a premium mystery variant, and a green cosmic border. Let's start with the most straightforward deck list, and as we get on in the video, we'll talk about some of the wackier ideas that I've been trying out. This is pretty stock Arishem with Galacta, the current season pass card, doing really great work being able to come out on turn 3 so that you can get value from her every turn after that, and Doom 2099, which can also come out on turn 3 and immediately get value, which makes it a great Arishem card. Both of these cards are really powerful 4-cost cards. Speaking of powerful 4-cost cards, Valentina is something that I've been having a lot of fun with, and the curve in this deck, you might notice, is a little bit higher than typical Arishem decks, and that's because once you've got Doom 2099 out, you're really only going to want to focus on playing 1 card every turn after that. This game in particular is a little bit wacky. The 1 card that I play each turn is just this same leader into cloning vats, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger because of Galacta, of course, as my opponent builds a huge Venom. So they're going to keep playing that Venom, and then I'm going to keep stealing it with leader, and then on the final turn, I'm able to drop a Mockingbird and another leader. That will allow me to steal my opponent's Venom 1 more time and battle for all 3 locations. I also wanted to include 1 short clip showcasing Lady Deathstrike, which is really good right now because it can blow up Doom 2099, and a lot of people are playing junk in the past day or 2 since Doom 2099's release, and Lady Deathstrike can clean up all of that as well. I'm gonna move on here to what I call Info Arishem, and this is probably a deck slightly better suited for Conquest mode. The whole point of this deck is to create an information disparity between yourself and your opponent, and use that to really inform your snaps and retreats, especially in Conquest mode where you get to play multiple games against the same opponent. For the 2-cost cards, we've got Mirage and Cable and a Loki, which can all steal cards from your opponent, and then we also have Copycat on top of that. A little bit of tech to round the deck out, and Blob is kind of a cute thing. It's probably not necessary to play Blob specifically, but if you can steal your opponent's deck with Loki and then have Blob eat it, you will gain a lot of information about the different cards that your opponent is playing, and they won't have that much of an idea of what you're playing, of course, because you're playing Arishem. So to be totally honest, this clip does not really pertain to Info Arishem, but I thought it was a nice way to show off Doom 2099, which was randomly generated this game, and yeah, just kind of shoehorning that in here. Information Arishem's a little bit tough to showcase the specific moments where that information is actually mattering, and this match is actually up against a fellow Arishem enjoyer, so yeah, we're not really getting that much information from seeing that they're not going to be drawing their Scorn this game and stuff like that. We do actually get really good value though by playing Loki up against an Arishem deck, and we will also be able to get a bunch of big cards here like Eliath, that we just get to slam 1 of these every turn and create a Doom bot. So winds up working out pretty nicely for me. It's actually Thanos Arishem as well. Some spoilers for some things to come. But yeah, now I can just slam a Thanos this turn. Next turn, before the vault closes, it will open back up again, but I think my opponent is somewhat likely to play into the vault next turn, so I can play Eliath there, and then that play line is further cemented when I draw Legion this turn, which means the vault actually is closing, and then I'm going to use a Legion to turn off Limbo by playing it into Crimson Cosmos as my only play on the final turn of the game, and I feel like that should lock it up. I'll also bring up, because my opponent is playing King Eitri here, I don't personally love King Eitri in Arishem. I think that just drawing one random Arishem card probably isn't worth just playing the 1/2, so I would generally avoid it. And one other thing that I wanted to bring up from the previous deck list is that deck also contains Dr. Doom, the normal Dr. Doom, which is obviously a great combo with Doom 2099, but more than that, I think it's just a fine Arishem card. That's something that I played in like the very first versions of Arishem that I built, because Dr. Doom can help you access tricky to get in locations. And so it's just a fine card, and to get even more value with it, sometimes with Doom 2099, is even sweeter. This is one more clip just to, I thought it was funny. I legioned Sokovia and discarded my Scorn, got my opponent Shang-Chi, the original Sokovia, discarded my Scorn and their Eliath, and I just battled for center because I drew Sentry on the final turn, but that was enough to do it. Next up, we have what I affectionately refer to as the new Arishem with a new update. Since you've last seen it, I have added in Lockjaw to this deck, which is a really great card with Thanos, and was actually nerfed because it was too good in Thanos as a 3-cost card, and now with that extra Arishem energy, you can play Lockjaw once again on turn 3 to reclaim some of that former glory. This deck really has 2 different game plans that it is going for. I mean, it's got a variety of different game plans that it can use because it's an Arishem deck. You can go like Quinjet into a turn 3 Nick Fury and then just drop a bunch of big bombs. That is obviously sweet, but it's also a Wiccan deck, and the stones allow you to fairly consistently activate Wiccan with just early curves with the stones, and then any of the 2-cost cards in this deck, as well as Quinjet and random cards created by Arishem. But when you don't have the perfect curve, what you can instead do is play these stones into Lockjaw and just get a ridiculous amount of value. You can see this is going to be an absolutely wild turn where each of these cards is drawing us cards, getting us value in that way, and then flipping into different cards in the deck, which just give even more power on the board. And then I've also added Vision into the deck, because that is a fantastic hit off Lockjaw, because then you can spread your power from Lockjaw into the other locations as well. And the YouTube short that I put out today is basically like the same exact thing happens in it. I play 3 cards into a Lockjaw, I get 2 cards that just are going to win that location, and then a Vision to help me win one of the other locations. This can lead to some absolutely crazy power outputs that can help you rival even Doom 2099. Next up, as we drift a little further into the sillier territory, I've got a Wiccsilver Arishem list where every game you are playing a turn 1 Quicksilver into a turn 2 Domino, so that you can potentially set up for a turn 3 Wiccan. And it's a little bit inconsistent, much more so than a typical Quicksilver Domino list, but even when your Wiccan fails, you still have your extra Arishem energy, and playing just these 2 1 and 2 cost cards allows you to make a much higher curve for the rest of your deck. And the other thing that this does, that I did talk about in my previous video as well, you are never going to randomly draw Quicksilver and Domino while not playing them in your deck. If you put them in your deck, now Arishem won't give you additional copies of them. That's what I'm trying to say here. This deck also plays Cull Obsidian, which I think is a really cute combo with Quicksilver, because you will always have a 1-cost card, unless of course gets Killmongered on turn 2. Not typically going to be something that happens. And it also plays the Black Panther combo. There's a few combos going on in this deck. In this game, I am Odining my Wiccan, which is just absolutely incredible, and then I'm going to have a ton of energy on the final turn. You can Arnim Zola your Black Panther or your Blob, or Arnim Zola your Eliath. I did want to talk about something else with this deck list, and that is the fact that I am not playing Shang-Chi, and I'm not playing some other cards that are obviously very good in Arishem, and the reason for that is I already know those cards are good. There's no real reason for me to play Shang-Chi in some of these experimental decks because I know Shang-Chi wins games. I don't need to figure that out. So when I am messing around and trying out some sillier ideas here, I'm playing some cards that I want to experiment with and not necessarily just the cards that I already know are good. My opponent and I actually both have the same idea here, and that is to just totally abandon Los Diablos base and battle for these other two. They beat me in Los Diablos, kind of awkward, but we're gonna beat them in both of the other locations, even with an Iron Lad just hitting an Arishem. Not super exciting, but that's still gonna be able to put out enough power to beat my opponent in New York and in Ruins. Next up, we have Arishem Lockout, which might initially look like a silly deck. I know we said we were getting sillier, but this is something that people were actually playing like a season and a half ago or so. Whenever Storm got nerfed to be a 4-cost card, people realized you either have to ramp it out with Psylocke or Zabu, which I showcased in my previous video that wasn't an Arishem deck, but this is another way that you can curve out with Storm, War Machine, and Legion. Just play them all in Arishem, and it is now better even than it was when people were playing it like a season and a half ago because the Arishem deck is shrunk down. That's an important thing to note here, that all of these decks that might seem a little bit on the sillier side are at the very least more consistent than they were when Arishem had slightly bigger decks. It used to add 15 cards. Now it is back down to just adding 12. There's some other synergy here with such a big curve. You are just slamming a huge haymaker every turn, which makes Doom 2099 fantastic. And honestly, a lot of these cards are already really good with Arishem, because being able to play them just a little bit below the curve has just some crazy synergies with what you're doing with things like Professor X and Storm, where you don't get to get as good a value against your opponents now because you don't have that extra energy on the first few turns of the game, but still playing a Professor or a Storm when your opponent is not prepared for it can definitely win you some cubes. Everyone knows Legion is fantastic in Arishem, and I think War Machine is just a better Jeff because you can afford to play it with the extra energy that Arishem provides. In addition to that, all of these lockdown elements are really good with Cosmo and Shang-Chi and Alioth, because then those cards are more likely to hit because your opponent has limited locations where they can play to. In this game, I tried to play Professor X to a location where my opponent was not, and they caught me with an Atuma. But I can still win the location with a Claw or this War Machine even. But the important thing here is I don't want my opponent to know that I can win the location, so I'm instead just going to be battling for Wakanda this turn with my Hulk. Seeing this, my opponent actually snaps, and then on the final turn, I Boomer Snap back because I can actually win in the Icebox. Claw is a fantastic way to win some additional cubes against people that aren't expecting it, and most people just aren't expecting it. Okay, now we are officially just looking at something silly. I call this Skaarishem, and I'll be honest, a huge reason that I threw this deck together is just for that name. I just thought that was a sweet portmanteau, and I also had an alliance quest where I had to win some games with Scar, so I threw it into Arishem, and here is what I came up with. But there is actually some definite overlap in synergy between Scar and Arishem, namely that Scar wants you to play a bunch of 4-cost cards, and Arishem helps you play a bunch of 4-cost cards, with Atuma, Crossbones, and Cole Obsidian all being fantastic in this deck to discount your Scar, and that you can play them on turn 3. So you can easily play a Scar card on turns 3, 4, and 5, and set up for a final turn where you get to drop Scar for free alongside whatever other stuff you are doing. We've got Armor and Cosmo in this list to protect against opposing Shang-Chi's, and you can run Shadow King because none of the cards in this deck are Shadow Kingable. So it's a little bit of an asymmetric thing, and you can even undebuff your Valentina cards if you want to try to use it with that. This is definitely on the sillier side, and again, like I could have seen using Quicksilver with it, but Thanos can be a 5/10 if you use Time Stone to discount it, and if you don't have Time Stone to discount it, then it's just a 6/10, and that's still a Scar card that you can play on turn 5 with Arishem. So all of this seemed sweet to me, and this was actually a really wacky game because I thought I was being clever by playing Reality Stone into Krakoa so that way I got the value from it and my opponent did not, but I was surprised when Reality Stone turned that into Bar with No Name, and now I am losing in that location with an Atuma and an Armor with no way to change that location again. So this is a little bit awkward. However, I did get that Krakoa value, so I do have a 2/12 in the form of Wolverine, and I'll play that alongside a Cole to battle up against my opponent's Iron Man in Lemuria. And I have a reasonable power advantage in that location right now, and on the final turn there's a few different options that I can choose between. I can try to soak some power into Sunspot because I need to win both of these other two locations because my opponent is not going to overcome me in Bar with No Name, so I kind of just have to decide how much power I want to put into Sunspot, but I ultimately just decide to play the Power Stone there. That'll probably transform into like a 2 power card and then soak 1 power into Sunspot while playing Thanos in Lemuria so that I can hopefully beat whatever they play there with their Iron Man. I'm up to 33 power and they only get up to 26 here with that Iron Lad, so I am going to be able to win despite the Bar with No Name kind of griefing me, and even with that Doombot we will still grab the win. Really silly game. To cap off this video, I wanted to showcase one more idea that I had for a deck, which I can't play it yet because Bruce Banner is not out yet. But what about High Evolutionary Arishem? And here is where it's also Lockout. I'm doing a lot of stuff with this one, probably too much, but maybe this is something that I will try out next week. Basically, with Doom 2099, I realized that with Arishem, at least on the final turn, you're always going to have an extra energy that you're not spending, unless of course you are playing Arishem itself on the final turn of the game. But barring that, you wind up in a lot of situations where your best play for the turn leaves you with unspent energy. And what's the best way to take advantage of that? Well, I do think that Bruce Banner could be a reasonable combo with Doom 2099, specifically in Arishem coming up. However, High Evolutionary, secretly, there's another 4-cost card in the game, is what I'm getting at. And one of the best 4-cost cards is Cyclops, powered up by High Evolutionary. And maybe that's an interesting card to play on turn 3 in Arishem. I'm not super sure. However, I do think that if you have a critical mass of these cards that get benefits from ending the turn with unspent energy, plus Bruce Banner, plus Doom 2099, I think that all of that can come together for a really cool combination. And then why am I playing Storm, War Machine, Legion? Well, because I think Legion is just a fine card to play in Arishem regardless, and Storm is also really good with Sunspot, Cyclops, and Misty Knight, and potentially Bruce as well, all cards that kind of already want to go together. So I think that maybe including the Storm, War Machine, Legion combo gives you 2 interesting directions to take this deck. You are either doing high Evo stuff with or without Dr. Doom, and then also Storm Legion stuff, again, with or without Dr. Doom, either Dr. Doom. Unfortunately, High Evolutionary will not pump up your Doombots, but Doom 2099 can do a decent job with that. And with that, that is going to be it for me today. Hopefully, this was a fun look into not just like what are the best cards with Arishem, what's the best Arishem deck, but just some ideas for some cool things that might be fun to explore. For today, that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.